The year was 2032, and the heat of the Middle Eastern sun mirrored the rising political temperatures around the world. Two nations that had once been bound by decades of ironclad strategic partnership, the United States and Israel, were now drifting apart. Their alliance, once considered unshakable, forged through wars, intelligence sharing, missile defense cooperation, and cutting-edge technological exchange, was now cracking at the seams. It began quietly, small disagreements behind closed doors, tense diplomatic meetings, subtle criticisms in the press. But over time, these cracks grew into open confrontations that no longer stayed in the shadows. One day, an Israeli general delivered a shocking statement during a press conference. "We will no longer sacrifice our sovereignty for the sake of American interests." The statement spread like wildfire across global news outlets. In Washington, it was considered not only aggressive but deeply ungrateful. Members of the U.S. Congress began calling for suspension of military aid to Israel. The Pentagon issued a formal protest. The White House demanded clarification. American media headlines labeled Israel's actions as betrayal. Political analysts called it a diplomatic earthquake. But the truth was, this fallout had been brewing for years. America had grown increasingly uneasy with Israel's expanding independence and unilateral military actions in the Middle East, especially regarding Iran, Syria, and Palestine. Israeli airstrikes, cyberattacks, and defiance of international pressure had become frequent flashpoints in Washington. Meanwhile, Israel viewed the United States as a fading superpower. In Israeli political circles, whispers grew louder. America is no longer reliable. With China and Russia rising, some Israeli strategists believed the time had come to forge new partnerships and reduce their dependency on Washington. One of the major flashpoints was over nuclear and cyber weapon technology. The U.S. accused Israel of running unauthorized ballistic missile programs. Israel insisted it was acting in national defense. In retaliation, Israeli intelligence claimed that the U.S. had begun covert surveillance of its nuclear facilities. Mossad and the CIA, once the closest of allies, now began spying on each other. This wasn't just a falling out. It was a silent war. Media warfare. The conflict soon spilled into the global media. U.S. outlets accused Israel of being an ungrateful partner that bit the hand that fed it, while Israeli media portrayed the U.S. as a declining empire, clinging to relevance. Editorials in Tel Aviv described America as no longer the beacon of Western power, while U.S. journalists questioned whether Israel had become a rogue state. International think tanks issued warnings. If this dispute escalated, they said, it could lead not just to a diplomatic breakdown, but potentially to a global security crisis. After all, these two nations weren't just allies, they were global influencers with immense reach. Diplomatic showdowns. At a United Nations summit, the tension boiled over. The U.S. ambassador accused Israel of undermining Western unity. In response, the Israeli delegate thundered back, "We are not America's puppet. We can survive without chains." Those words were not just rhetoric, they were rupture. After Israel's defiant military and diplomatic posture became impossible to ignore, the U.S. administration decided it could no longer rely on quiet diplomacy. On August 5, during a press conference at the Pentagon, the U.S. Secretary of State made a calculated statement. No nation, regardless of past alliances, is exempt from accountability. Continued disregard for strategic alignment will carry consequences. The message, though not naming Israel directly, was unmistakably aimed at it. Within hours, key members of the U.S. Congress called for an immediate review of the annual $3.8 billion military aid to Israel. For decades, this aid had symbolized the deep military partnership between the two nations. But now it had become a bargaining chip. A senior White House advisor told the media on background, "We're not threatening, we're recalibrating. If Israel wants to act like an independent superpower, it must stand on its own." The United States began by suspending advanced arms shipments, including F-35 spare parts and missile defense components critical to the Iron Dome and David's sling systems. Though not a complete arms embargo, it sent a message. Washington was ready to squeeze. Strain on military cooperation. For Israel, the blow wasn't just financial, it was operational. The U.S. military canceled several joint exercises scheduled for late 2032 under the Defender of Freedom and Iron Saber programs. These exercises weren't merely symbolic, they were essential for real-time coordination, intelligence sharing, and battlefield simulations. Their suspension meant that Israel's elite units would miss joint drills with U.S. cyber forces, naval operations, and satellite-based targeting simulations. Privately, Israeli generals feared their forces would be strategically blinded in future operations. Still, Israel refused to flinch. A message from Tel Aviv. Prime Minister Yitzhak Navon, addressing the Knesset in a nationally televised speech, struck a defiant tone. We do not bend to pressure. We do not accept conditions on our sovereignty. If the cost of freedom is isolation, we will pay it, and we will prevail. Cheers erupted in the parliament chamber, but the public reaction was mixed. While nationalists praised the speech, many moderates feared that the prime minister was pushing the nation toward dangerous isolation. Behind the scenes, Israel's foreign ministry began reaching out to non-Western partners, most notably China and Russia. The pivot east. In a series of discreet but well-documented meetings, Israeli diplomats met with their Chinese and Russian counterparts in Geneva, Baku, and Beijing. The topics: cybersecurity partnerships, arms cooperation, and alternative financial mechanisms. One Israeli intelligence official anonymously admitted, "We can't replace the U.S., not completely. But we can reduce our dependence." That's the message. China, eager to break America's influence in the Middle East, quickly offered trade incentives and satellite access. Russia, still under Western sanctions, saw in Israel a possible foothold in Western technology circles. For the first time in decades, Israel was shopping for new allies. Backlash in Washington. Back in D.C., these developments were seen as betrayal. American intelligence agencies confirmed that Israel was in discussions with Huawei and ZTE to upgrade its telecom infrastructure. Firms banned in the U.S. due to national security risks. Even more alarming, Israeli cybersecurity units reportedly began joint testing with a Russian AI defense platform. U.S. senators took to the airwaves in outrage. On Capitol Hill, new legislation was proposed to fully freeze defense cooperation with Israel and reassess intelligence sharing protocols. President Elena Martinez, facing heavy political pressure, made the following statement from the Rose Garden. "We do not wish to sever ties. But let me be clear. Any nation that aligns with our adversaries must reconsider what kind of partnership it expects from the United States." It was a veiled ultimatum, but it carried the weight of decades of alliance. The ambassador's summoning. The final straw came in mid-September when the Israeli ambassador to the United States, Reuven Adler, was formally summoned to the State Department for a high-level reprimand. The meeting, held behind closed doors, lasted over 2 tense hours. According to insiders, the American officials presented satellite images and communication logs proving Israeli contact with Russian defense contractors. Ambassador Adler remained composed, repeating Israel's official stance: strategic independence, not hostility. But by the end of the meeting, one thing was clear: the gloves were off. Global ripples. Other U.S. allies watched the rift with anxiety. The UK, Canada, and Germany attempted quiet mediation. France offered to host talks. Even Gulf nations like the UAE and Saudi Arabia, once distant from Israeli politics, began lobbying both sides to step back from the brink. Markets reacted quickly. Defense stocks dipped. Oil prices spiked amid fears of a broader regional conflict. Analysts predicted that if America and Israel broke apart, it would realign global diplomacy overnight, creating space for authoritarian states to rise. Behind the headlines. While the media focused on political speeches, military bases along the eastern Mediterranean were being quietly fortified. Israeli cyber units worked around the clock to diversify their digital infrastructure away from American systems. U.S. satellites began shadowing Israeli submarines in the Red Sea. This wasn't a shooting war, not yet. But it had become a silent mobilization. Each nation was preparing, economically, digitally, and militarily, for the worst. A turning point approaches. By October 2032, pressure and threats had become daily currency in U.S.-Israel relations. What began as a rift was now a canyon. Trust, the foundation of their alliance, had all but vanished. The world stood on edge, watching two former allies inch toward something unthinkable. Geopolitical analysts sounded the alarm. If tensions weren't defused soon, the world might witness an actual confrontation between these two military giants. Both had nuclear capabilities. Both were global cyber superpowers. Both commanded vast networks of influence and loyal allies. And most dangerously, both now distrusted each other. It wasn't about weapons anymore. The true weapon was broken trust, and that's the hardest to repair. Conclusion: standing at the edge. As 2032 drew to a close, the U.S.Israel alliance was barely holding on. The distance between Washington and Tel Aviv was no longer just geographic. It was political, emotional, and deeply strategic. Across newsrooms and military briefings around the globe, one question lingered in the air. Are America and Israel heading toward war?